Have you ever heard of a poor cowboy who married a 71-year-old widow who owned a huge ranch in the middle of the West? Some say he did it for the money. Others say she did it because she was lonely. But few know that. Soon after that hasty wedding, Ethan Ward discovered a secret that would change everything, including his life. And the land of Lone Cedar Ranch was more rotten than anyone could have imagined. Between sandstorms, stalkers lurking in the shadows, and an old woman whose heart is torn from the loss of her child, Ethan is forced to choose leave for safety, or stay to protect the place that even he doesn't understand has become home. If it were you, would you choose safety, or would you choose courage to protect the only person who sees your true worth? And how many wounds in life can only be healed by silence and compassion? We invite you to join this emotional story. If you feel something touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join us on the next journey. That afternoon, the western sun spread a hot blanket over the entire town of Red Valley. The wind blew in dry gusts, carrying the smell of burnt grass and dust. Ethan Ward stood in front of the old post office, clutching a debt collection notice, the paper yellowed from being folded and refolded too many times. His eyes squinted against the sun, but not from the glare, but from the weariness of a man who had been burdened for too many years. His family's last farm, a small plot of land his father had built with his calloused hands, was now a memory. Everything had been sold, mortgaged, and the debt had piled up because of a 3-year hay drought. But no matter how many odd jobs Ethan did, from mending fences to shoeing horses, it was never enough to keep up with the rising bills. Ethan wasn't the type to complain. He was as quiet as the rocky hills west of town, where the wind blew through the crevices in a long howl that sounded like the confession of the earth and sky. But today, with the personal property confiscation notice posted right before his eyes, he knew he had hit rock bottom. He tucked the note into the pocket of his frayed denim jacket. He'd worn it since he was 30, now he was 38. Every tear represented a storm, a bitterly cold winter, or a long night ride after lost cattle. Ethan didn't have much, but what he did have mattered. He led the old horse Rusty into the rusty 1995 pickup, trying to start the engine several times before it would start. The engine shook as if it were as tired as its owner. Ethan turned the truck toward the dirt road leading out of town, where a wooden gate bore the sign Lone Cedar Ranch, one of the oldest ranches in Red Valley. The ranch's owner, Marjorie Lane, was rumored to be one of the toughest women in the West. She had run the ranch with her husband, Nathan Lane, a kind man the town still remembered. But after his death, she lived alone for more than a decade, running the thousands of acres with just a few close employees. Marjorie Lane was 71 years old, her hair white, but her every step was as steady as the ancient cedar tree that grew in front of the ranch gate, the tree that had become the symbol of Lone Cedar Ranch. The first time Ethan saw her was the day he applied for the job. She stood on the front porch, the afternoon sun casting a soft halo over her silver hair. She was dressed casually, a pale blue shirt, clean jeans, and well-polished light brown leather boots. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were like the smoldering fire in a winter stove, warm and unreadable. "Are you Ethan Ward?" Her voice was low and hoarse, like someone who spoke very little but each sentence was firm. Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm looking for a job. Anything is fine." She looked at him for a few seconds, a look long enough to see the weariness in him, but also sharp enough to see something else: perseverance, dignity, and a suppressed sadness. "You used to have a family ranch," she said matter-of-factly, without question. "Yes, I did," Ethan replied, his voice as small as the wind through dry grass. Marjorie Lane didn't say sorry or condolences. She just nodded, as if in the world of groundskeepers this loss was too familiar to need consolation. There was a long silence. The wind carried the scent of pine and old straw from the distant barn. Then she said something Ethan would never forget. "I don't need a servant, Ethan. I need a legal companion." Ethan stood still. The wind whipped at his clothes, trailing dust from the road, but he was frozen in place. She continued calmly, as if discussing the harvest. "You know what I mean. I'm asking you to marry me." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know if he had misheard or if the afternoon sun had made his head spin. But Marjorie's eyes weren't joking. There was no weakness, no pleading. Just a request spoken with the frankness of Westerners, people used to being real and taking responsibility. Ethan took a half step back. Are you serious? Marjorie nodded. You need a way out. I need someone who can carry on the Lane name to keep the land from those who want to devour it after I am gone. I have no children, no one left, and I believe you are the perfect fit. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. He bent down, placing his hand on Rusty's head to steady himself. No one had ever offered him anything so grand, and no one had ever seen enough of him, a poor cowboy near rock bottom, to give him such an extraordinary opportunity. He said as if exhaling, I don't think I'm the right person for this kind of marriage. Marjorie remained upright, her eyes looking farther than he had expected. You are not greedy. You are not someone who would take advantage of someone else's weakness. That is what I need. She paused, then said slowly, and I'm sure you know, sometimes silence is consent. Ethan turned away, looking out at the distant hills where the sun was sinking, turning the land a fiery orange. He could hear his heart pounding. His mind flashed back to his parents, the heydays, the decisions that had cost him everything. And Marjorie's words, the words that had turned a new page in his life, I propose you to marry me. He knew he was at a crossroads that no one had taught him how to choose. But deep down, Ethan also knew sometimes people don't choose the future chooses them. And then just 3 days later, Ethan Ward, wearing his only undamaged white shirt, stood beside Marjorie Lane in a small ceremony on the front porch of Lone Cedar Ranch. The wind blew softly, the wood creaking like the heartbeat of the land. No flowers, no guests, just Sam Ridge and the old minister. Ethan's hand shook slightly as he signed, not because of fear, but because he sensed his fate was taking a completely different direction, a direction that even he himself did not know would lead him to. Ethan woke up the first morning after the wedding feeling mixed. The echo of a big decision still lingered somewhere in the back of his mind, heavy and unfamiliar. The early morning sunlight from Red Valley filtered through the small window, casting a warm yellow glow across the wooden floorboards. The scent of old pine fresh coffee from the kitchen and hay from the stables blended together to create the signature Lone Cedar Ranch atmosphere. Ethan's room was in the east wing, built years ago for the rancher's son. The bed was large, the comforter clean, the bookshelves neat, even an old saddle hanging on the wall as a decoration. It was all so complete, so nice. For someone used to sleeping in makeshift rooms, drafty cabins, and the backs of trucks, it all felt unreal. He sat up and reached for his old boots on the floor. The scratches on the toes told the story of his journey from his days working on his father's ranch to his work as a hired hand across Wyoming. Ethan didn't have much left, but his boots were the one thing that never left him. Ethan pulled his shirt over his shoulders and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was cool, the sky so blue you could see the wisps of cloud. In the distance, rolling hills lay like huge waves under the sky. It was a familiar scene of the American West, beautiful, lonely, and a reminder of the smallness of human life. Marjorie Lane was already sitting at the table, a mug of tea in her hand. She wore a gray silk dress, the collar buttoned up and sat upright, but her shoulders were slightly hunched with age. When she heard footsteps, she raised her head, her eyes softening. "Good morning, Ethan." Her voice was low, quiet, but sure. Ethan nodded. "Hello. I slept well." She smiled slightly, then gestured toward the coffee pot. "Go ahead. Here everyone pours their own coffee." Ethan felt a little embarrassed. He wasn't used to being treated like family. But he quietly poured coffee into a white ceramic mug and sat down across from her. The two of them said nothing more for several minutes. There was only the steady ticking of the wall clock and the gentle breeze rustling the window. Then Marjorie put down her cup. "Sam will show you around South Pasture today. You need to get the lay of the land if you plan on staying long." Ethan heard the word stay, and his heart fluttered. They were married on paper at least, but he hadn't felt like he belonged anywhere in years. He took a sip of coffee, then said softly, "I will do my best." Marjorie didn't look at him but nodded. "I believe you can do it." Sam Ridge appeared in the doorway just as the sun was rising. He wore an old brown cowboy hat, the wings sunburned from years of working in the fields. His jeans were faded, his boots dusty, and he stood with the ease of a man who had lived his life with grass, wind, and cattle. Sam looked Ethan up and down, his eyes observant but not unpleasant, like someone assessing the inner qualities of the person in front of him rather than the outer appearance. "Let's go," he said briefly. Ethan followed Sam to the stables. Rusty was clean, his gray-brown fur shining in the sun. Sam turned to look at Ethan. "Your horse is good. Old but steady. Like you." Ethan chuckled. "We're the same." They mounted their horses and rode along the trails that ran along the edge of the ranch's vast grounds. Sam pointed out each area as he rode, where to plant grass, where to feed the Angus cattle, where to fix fences. Ethan listened, feeling the vastness of Lone Cedar Ranch. It was so big that one felt small in the vast expanse of land. But the deeper he went, the more Ethan noticed the gazes, the distant gazes of the servants. They said nothing, only pausing for a few seconds when they saw him riding beside Sam. A little doubt, a little surprise, and most of all confusion was evident in their eyes. No wonder. A poor day laborer in his late 40s suddenly married the richest woman in town. The news must have spread like wildfire through Red Valley. Sam spoke up as if reading Ethan's mind. "Don't mind their eyes. People are always curious about things they don't understand." Ethan didn't reply, but inside he felt a strange feeling, not fear, but a sense of responsibility he didn't fully understand. Ethan returned to the main house that afternoon, his arms aching from a day of building a new fence. Marjorie stood on the porch, brushing dust off the sun-dried tablecloth. Her eyes glanced at the stains on his shirt, then softened. "How is work?" she asked. "It's fine. I've never seen a ranch this big. Lone Cedar has a soul of its own. It responds to those who listen." She paused, then spoke more slowly. "You seem to be a good listener." Ethan didn't know how to respond. There was a gentle confidence in her words that unsettled him. A woman her age through so much shouldn't have to trust anyone anymore. But she trusted him quietly, unobtrusively, without force. That night, as Ethan was about to turn off the lights, he heard a small sound coming from the west wing. A cough. Not loud, but sharp, dry, and deep. The cough of someone who had been coughing for a long time, enough to make his chest ache. Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The night air was chilly against his skin. Marjorie's light flickered behind the curtains. He stood still for a few seconds, not out of curiosity, but because his heart just tightened, just knowing she was suffering something, all alone. In the darkness, Ethan realized this marriage was not simple. It was not just a deal. It was not about paperwork or holding land. There's something deeper, older, and more painful. Something Marjorie Lane wasn't ready to say. But Ethan felt it very clearly, and the answer seemed to lie somewhere in the silence of the western night, in that hidden cough, and in the way she looked at him when she said she believed him. Ethan stood looking toward her room for a moment longer. Then he went back into his room, closing the door softly. At that moment, he had a very clear premonition. What awaited him ahead was more complex and heart-wrenching than anything he had ever experienced in his life. The next morning, Ethan woke up early, as was his habit for someone who had lived his whole life on the land. It was still dark. The sky was just a pale purple streak stretching from the foot of the mountain. He put on his coat, put on his boots, and stepped out onto the porch. The chilly air made Ethan take a deep breath, letting his thin white breath drift out in front of him. The early morning breeze of Red Valley always carried a distinct smell, damp earth mixed with the scent of cedar resin, a little pungent but pleasant. It reminded him of those distant mornings when he was a child, following his father to the cowshed before dawn. On the wooden table outside there was a pot of coffee and a small note placed neatly. The writing on the paper was round, slanted slightly to the right, with the trace of someone who had been writing by hand for decades. "I'll go to the stables first. You can take half a day off today. M." Ethan picked up the note and was silent for a few seconds. What made a 71-year-old rancher wake up earlier than a man 30 years her junior? He felt both admiration and a pang in his heart. He poured coffee, took a few sips, and headed for the stable. As he approached, he heard the rustling of straw and the scraping of wooden door clips. Marjorie was standing inside, a small broom in her hand, carefully cleaning every corner. She wore a light brown sweater, a thin scarf around her neck, and each movement seemed slow but firm. "You should have let me do this," Ethan said, his voice low but loud enough for her to hear. Marjorie didn't turn around, just replied, "Cleaning the stables keeps me sane. And I like the look of surprise on your face when you see me doing the hard work." Ethan smiled slightly, a rare smile in the heavy days he was having. "I don't think anyone in town believes you still do these things yourself." Marjorie paused, leaning lightly on her broom. "Let people think what they want. I do what I've done since I was a young girl." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. In the soft morning light she looked both strong and lonely. A loneliness that was not mournful but like the dust of time covering a mirror that still shone within. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked softly. This time Marjorie turned back. Her eyes wavered for a split second, just enough for Ethan to sense that she was hiding something. Then she smiled. "I'm stronger than you think," but her voice was hoarse, and when she reached up to touch her neck, Ethan saw that her hand was shaking. A strange premonition came over me. After helping his grandmother clean the barn, Ethan went back inside to get some oatmeal for breakfast. As he opened the cabinet near the sink, he was surprised to see a small pillbox fall out. It rolled onto the table, rolled around, and stopped right next to the edge. Ethan slowly picked it up. Morphine sulfate high-dose tablets. He stood still. The words seemed to burn themselves into his eyes, each character bold, cold, and unmistakable. A medicine healthy people never needed. A medicine only those who were so sick they were exhausted relied on. He swallowed back the lump in his throat. Morphine is not a cold medicine, not a cough medicine, not something old people take to help them sleep. It is a medicine for severe pain, pain that belongs to those diseases that people usually avoid naming. Cancer, severe neuritis, chronic problems. In that moment, Ethan stilled. It was as if a cold wind had blown right through his chest. He heard light footsteps behind him. Marjorie stood in the kitchen doorway, leaning slightly toward the handle. She looked at the medicine box in Ethan's hand. The two were silent for a few breaths. Then she said very slowly, very softly, "Don't worry. I've got everything under control." Her voice was more tired than usual, but her eyes were not pleading, not tearful. Just sincere. Ethan put the medicine box on the table, trying to keep his voice steady. "I can help." Marjorie walked over and took the medicine box and put it away in the drawer, as if nothing special had happened. "I know you can help with a lot of things, Ethan, but there's no need to bother you." Ethan frowned slightly. "You don't mind me?" She turned back, her eyes as calm as a lake. "Ethan, I don't want you to carry my burden. I've lived longer than I thought I could. And I'll keep doing my part until I can't anymore." He wanted to say something more, to ask directly, to understand exactly how she felt, but he couldn't. There was something in Marjorie's voice that stopped him. A deep dignity. A limit she used to protect herself from weakness. And Ethan knew that all too well. He had been like that after his parents died. People with high self-esteem often choose silence over complaining. "Okay," Ethan said softly, his voice low. "I won't ask any more questions, but I'm still here." Marjorie nodded, her eyes softening. "That's enough." In the afternoon, as the sun turned a burnt orange, Ethan went to the stables to retrieve his horse's reins and check the ranch. Sam Ridge leaned against the fence, an unlit cigarette in his hand. He looked at Ethan, then back at the main house. "You're starting to realize something, aren't you?" Sam asked. Ethan was silent. Sam took a breath of air instead of smoke, then continued. "Marjorie is strong, but her strength is limited. She's not the type to ask for help when she's in pain. Don't force her." Ethan turned around and said in a low voice, "Do you know what's wrong with her?" Sam shook his head quickly. "Nobody knows. She won't tell. And someone like her, if she won't tell, don't bother telling. Just do your part. That's enough." But Ethan doesn't think so. A feeling began to form in his heart, not exactly love, but a silent connection. Like when one finds someone who shares the same wound, even if they don't say it in words. And then that evening, as Ethan was about to close the barn door, he heard a slight noise from the end of the barn. Just a small bump, but enough to make him alert. He walked over. The yellow light from the porch cast a faint glow. And in that glow, Ethan saw a figure disappearing around the corner. He stopped and looked carefully, but no one appeared. Only the sound of wind and light flying straw remained. Ethan stood there for a few minutes, his heart pounding harder than usual. Something strange had just happened. A shadow. Someone who didn't belong at the ranch. And the worst part is, Ethan had no idea who it was. I don't know why that person appeared. And more importantly, I don't know what they are looking for. But he had a feeling. This was just the beginning. The morning was so clear that Ethan could see the clouds drifting over the rocky hills. The early morning light streaked across Lone Cedar Ranch's wooden gate. Marjorie said she would take him to check out the farthest property on the southern edge, a place the Red Valley people called by a simple but mysterious name, Southwind Gully. Ethan prepared Rusty's saddle. The old horse's coat reflected the light, a reminder of the years he had endured through drought. Marjorie approached slowly, her hand on the saddlebar, checking that each strap was secure. She had the demeanor of a rancher who had worked all her life, careful, thorough, and responsible. "Southwind Gully isn't close," she said, her breathing soft but steady. "We have to go over 2 slopes and through a small section of pine forest." Ethan frowned slightly. "Do you need a break? It's hotter than usual today." Marjorie looked at him, her eyes somewhat serious and warm. "If I don't leave today, someday I won't be able to leave. I don't waste the days I can still stand." Ethan didn't say anything more, but, in the silence, his heart slowed down a beat. There were some words that weren't too dramatic, didn't carry sobs, but made people feel a strangely deep pain. "The road to Southwind Gully is not for the faint of heart. The narrow path winds between rocky hillsides, the stones smooth from years of wind-worn sand. On either side are tall cedar trees, their gnarled trunks bearing the history of this land." Ethan rode in front with Marjorie in the back. Sam Ridge wanted to come along, but Marjorie said she wanted Ethan to learn the feel of the land, a phrase that stuck with him. The wind blew through the trees, carrying with it a rustling sound that seemed like whispers from years past. Ethan didn't know why he felt it so clearly, but the more he walked, the more he felt like this place was more than just land. It was like a memory opening up. After more than an hour of riding, they reached the entrance of the valley. Southwind Gully appeared like a deep cut in the hills, a long, steep valley through which the wind blew with a sound unlike any other. It was like a sigh, like a long, distant hum, like the voice of someone telling a story. Marjorie stopped her horse at the edge of the valley. She said nothing, just stared down at the bottom. Her eyes were distant, filled with something both sad and determined. Ethan turned back and saw that her whole body was shaking slightly, but she kept her back straight, showing no weakness. "Do you want to go down?" Ethan asked. Marjorie shook her head. "No need. Standing here is enough." Ethan left Rusty standing beside him and stepped down to the ground. He walked closer to the edge, following her gaze. The valley was strangely beautiful. The grass grew in patches and large rocks lay scattered about like relics of an old battle. The wind blew through the canyon, making a long, lonely howl that made Ethan's heart clench. He turned. "You've been here many times," Marjorie smiled slightly, the smile not hiding the ripples behind her eyes. "Enough to know that there are beautiful places not to be admired, but to be remembered." Ethan didn't understand the whole thing right away, but the way she said it made it clear this wasn't just a spot on a ranch map. It was part of her life, a part she wasn't ready to tell. After a few minutes of silence, Marjorie spoke first. "Ethan, have you ever thought that land also holds people's memories?" The question took him a little by surprise. "You mean what happened here?" Marjorie nodded slightly. "The earth does not forget. It holds everything, both laughter and tears. It holds the memories of those who have passed through, even when no one remembers them." Ethan looked down the valley again. The wind blew harder, pushing the brush into small circles like someone was twirling the threads of time. "Do you have any memories here?" Ethan asked, his voice soft and reserved. Marjorie did not answer at once. She took a deep breath, as if drawing courage from the wind itself. "There are memories that cannot be put into words." Her gaze slid down to the valley floor. "But they live in me, every day." Ethan sensed in those words a wound so old that time could not heal it. A wound kept hidden by a thick layer of silence, enough so that outsiders would not notice, but enough that anyone who listened carefully would understand that it had never healed. He didn't try to ask more. Westerners have their own way of respecting each other's pain through silence. On the way back, Ethan rode beside her, slowing to match Marjorie's pace. The sun was rising, the light filtering through the trees in dancing streaks of light on the dirt road. As he approached the small pine forest, Ethan suddenly saw something strange. A large boulder near the path was tilted to one side, the soil beneath it fresh and damp, as if someone had been digging there recently. He stopped his horse. "Look over there." Marjorie narrowed her eyes, watching for a few seconds. She said nothing, but her expression tensed in a way that would have been imperceptible if Ethan hadn't spent so much time watching her. "It must be an animal," she said. But her voice was uncertain. Ethan dismounted and bent down to look. The earth had been churned up in a very deliberate way, not animal-like. There were boot prints, very clear. Just now, he stood up and looked toward the forest. Someone had arrived at Southwind Gully before them. Someone has touched the soil of Lone Cedar Ranch, which holds something Ethan doesn't understand. "Does anyone frequent this area?" Ethan asked. Marjorie was silent. A very long time. Then she said something that made the wind seem colder on Ethan's skin. "No. Except for people who have something to hide." By the time they returned to the ranch, the sky was turning to afternoon. The shadows of the long fences stretched across the ground, creating dark streaks like long lines of untold stories. Before entering the house, Marjorie put her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You needn't think too much about Southwind Gully. It's a thing of the past." Ethan looked her straight in the eye. "But someone just came in there." Marjorie was silent, her hands clenched slightly. Then she said only one sentence, "Ethan, there are some things, if buried deep, it's best not to dig them up." But her eyes dark with memory, said otherwise. "It says the truth is still there, and it's waiting for you." That night, as Ethan stepped out onto the porch to reassemble the firewood, he saw something that made his heart pound. Marjorie's locked door, the door she told him never to open, shook slightly. Like there's someone inside. Not the wind, not a mouse, a real touch. Ethan stopped in the dark, his chest tight, as if it were being pulled. Southwind Gully, the overturned rock, the footprints in the dirt, and that door. Everything connected in an invisible thread wrapping around Ethan, as if signaling that he was about to step into a part of the past that Marjorie Lane had kept silent all her life. A part the land never forgets. That morning the sun had barely risen above the hills when the wind blew through the cedar trees, carrying with it the crisp, cold scent of the changing season. Ethan woke with a feeling of unease in his chest, as if his sleep had been interrupted by some event he couldn't name. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The crisp morning air stung his skin. As Ethan bent down to tie his shoelaces, a faint sound came from the stables, the sound of something falling to the ground, then silence. He paused. Then he ran straight towards the sound. As Ethan approached, he saw Marjorie Lane crouched beside the feed trough. She leaned against the wooden frame, breathing hard and fast. Next to her, a metal bucket had rolled to one side, leaving a trail of dirt on the straw. "Marjorie!" Ethan called louder than ever since returning to the ranch. He lunged forward, wrapping his arms around her shoulders before she collapsed. She was heavier than he'd thought. Not so much her weight, but her life force was so weak today that it shook Ethan. "It's okay," she tried to say, her voice hoarse and broken. "Just, my head is a little turned." But Ethan knew that wasn't true. Her arms were colder than any morning before, and her breathing had unusually long gaps between each breath. "She's not okay," Ethan said, his voice low but tense. "We're going inside. Now." Without waiting for her answer, he gently helped her to her feet. Marjorie didn't resist. That made Ethan's heart clench more than anything else. A woman like Marjorie Lane, who had run a 1,000-acre farm with a sharp eye, was never one to let anyone take her under her wing. If she let him do it today, she was truly exhausted. Ethan laid her on the sofa in the living room and pulled the woolen blanket over her legs. Her face was paler than usual, her lips were dry, and her thin hands trembled like the last leaves of the season. "Let me call Sam," Ethan said. Marjorie shook her head a little more forcefully than she had left. "No one. You can't keep hiding it any longer," Ethan said, unable to contain his nervousness. "I saw your medicine. I know what kind of pain it's for." Marjorie closed her eyes. A sigh escaped her, less of exhaustion than of acceptance. Ethan stood beside her, his hands clenched, the same helpless feeling he had felt years after losing his family. "Okay," she said softly, "please sit down." Ethan pulled the wooden chair closer to the sofa. He sat down, leaning slightly toward her. Marjorie opened her eyes and looked straight at him. No more avoidance, no more bravery, only the truth. "Ethan, I have lung cancer." She paused, her voice shaking slightly. "Terminal." Ethan felt his heart sink even deeper. He had known this, but hearing it from her made it painfully real. "How long has it been?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "More than 2 years," Marjorie replied. "I've been doing fine for a long time. But the last few months, things have been quicker than I expected." Ethan bowed his head. His hands tightened on the hem of his jeans, trying to keep calm. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" His voice trembled but remained small, as if afraid to break the quiet atmosphere of this gloomy morning. Marjorie looked out the window. The weak light illuminated her silver hair. "Because I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, Ethan." Her voice wasn't as hard as usual but had a human softness to it. "I don't want this ranch to be disturbed. And I don't want to be a burden." Ethan shook his head, his eyes burning. She was never a burden. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind blew through the roof, making a rustling sound as if the heavens and earth were listening to their conversation. "I didn't tell Sam," Marjorie continued slowly and matter-of-factly, "because he had enough sadness in his life. I didn't tell the doctor unless it was necessary. And I didn't tell anyone until you found that medicine box." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He turned away for a moment to catch his breath. What do you need from me?" he finally asked, his voice low. Marjorie looked at him for a long time, her eyes reflecting the strange stillness of someone who has accepted her fate but still has things she cannot let go of. "What I need from you," she said, "is not pity, not care, not sacrifice." She placed her hand on hers cold but gentle to the touch. "The only thing I need is your presence." Ethan felt her hands tremble slightly, but not from weakness. It was because telling him the truth seemed to strip her of the invisible armor she had worn for so many years. "I had no one by my side," she continued. "My husband was gone. My relatives had left me. I had lived for many years in silence, and I thought I could live like that for many more years. But I was wrong." Ethan looked at her, his eyes as deep as the color of dry earth after rain. "You're not alone anymore," he said slowly. The words made Marjorie blink. She took a small breath as if the words touched a place she had kept hidden for too long. A long while later, she said again, "Ethan, I didn't marry you to have someone to take care of me when I was sick. I married you because I needed someone to keep Lone Cedar Ranch away from people waiting for me to fall." He nodded, he understood. But he also knew there was something else. Her illness was progressing faster than she thought. And that made Ethan's worry like a deep thorn impossible to pull out. When Dr. Helen Granger came to check on us, she entered the house with the brisk gait but knowing eyes of someone who had been a family doctor for 4 decades. Ethan leaned against the door, his arms folded, his eyes fixed on Marjorie. "Doctor." Granger examined her, listened to her lungs, then looked at him. "She's very tired," the doctor said softly. "But she's still mentally alert. The most important thing is that she doesn't overexert herself." Ethan asked worriedly, "Is there any way to make her feel better?" Dr. Granger exhaled slowly. "The only thing is to relieve the pain, keep calm, and avoid strong emotions." As she left, she put her hand on Ethan's shoulder and said something that he would never forget. "The best thing you can do for her is to be there for her. Don't let her go through this alone." Ethan nodded, feeling the ground beneath his feet change color. That afternoon, after the doctor left, Ethan sat next to Marjorie on the porch. She was wrapped in a thin blanket, her eyes looking out over the fields. Gentle wind, quiet land, pale sun. "Ethan." "Yes, thank you for being here." He turned to look at her. "You don't have to thank me. I only did the right thing." Marjorie smiled, a thin but beautiful smile like the late afternoon sunlight drifting down behind a wooden fence. "You have a beautiful heart, Ethan." Her eyes lingered on his face. "And Lone Cedar Ranch needs hearts like that." Ethan looked down at his hands. The same hands that had carried heavy loads for years were now doing something else, carrying the worries of an old woman he hadn't realized he cared so much about. But he knew one thing for sure: from today, everything is different. Not just because of the truth about the disease, because I have begun to feel things that people can only understand when their hearts are truly open. The morning after Marjorie told Ethan about her illness, there was a new silence in the house. Not the usual silence of Lone Cedar Ranch, the silence of wind blowing through the meadow or wood cracking in the sun, but the silence of a house keeping too big a secret for a weary woman. Ethan slept lightly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Marjorie lying on the sofa yesterday, her eyes lost in the pain she tried to hide from the world. He left the room and walked down the long old pine-lined hallway. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the doors, making small streaks of light on the floor. He stopped when he passed the west wing where the locked door she had told him not to open was. That door is a little open today. Very light. Just a small gap like a knife blade, enough for light to shine through the edge of the door in a thin streak. Ethan stood still. The door was always locked. Marjorie always had the key. No one was allowed in. But today it opened. He approached his chest, tightening for some reason. When he put his hand on the doorknob, it felt colder than usual, as if inside were a fugitive chamber where time had stopped. He pushed gently. The door opened with a small click, like the sigh of an old memory awakened. Inside was a room Ethan had never seen in his days at Lone Cedar Ranch. The light was dim because the windows were covered by thick curtains, but enough for him to see the entire space. The walls were covered with old black and white photographs. The wooden frames were bare, some of them chipped with age. Family albums were neatly arranged on the dresser. A small table was lightly covered with dust. A large bookcase against the wall held hundreds of notebooks, documents, maps, and boxes of papers. But what made Ethan stop was the large photo placed on the shelf in the middle of the room. The photograph showed a young man about 20. His eyes resembled Marjorie's straight, deep, and with the intelligence of someone born to responsibility. Beside him stood Nathan Lane, tall and gentle, his hand resting on his son's shoulder with the pride of a loving father. Ethan stepped closer to the photo, his heart skipping a beat. Jacob Lane. He read the name written in black ink below the frame. He had never heard that name from Marjorie. Never. Not once. Ethan's heart slowed, as if he were about to touch the deepest part of the story she had never dared to tell. He glanced around the room. There was a wooden box near the foot of the cupboard. It was old and dark, as if it were decades old. Ethan knelt down and opened it. Inside was a leather diary, some snapshots from Southwind Gully, and a neatly folded letter. The letter was not sent, written in ink, italicized by a young person. "Mom, I think someone's following me. I found something under the rocks at Southwind. I'll tell you everything when I get back. Don't trust anyone outside the ranch. I love you. J." Lane. Ethan read the words over and over again, his heart as sad as the sky in the west before a big storm. Jacob Lane, Marjorie's son, is dead. She never said. But the words in the letter, the worry in the words, and the old photograph suggested that Jacob had discovered something very dangerous. Ethan glanced at the pile of papers on the table. Some were marked with yellow sections. An old map of Red Valley stretched out with red pen marking the area around Southwind Gully. And at the edge of the map is a company symbol, Western Meridian Land Co. Ethan remembered the strange man who had been watching the ranch the past few days. The cold face, the way he stood watching from afar. A name Sam had whispered as if he were talking about something that shouldn't be mentioned: Caleb Boone. He stood up, feeling a heavy feeling in his chest. There was something about Western Meridian and Southwind Gully. Something about Jacob Lane's death. And something Marjorie wasn't telling, or dare not tell. Ethan was bending down to close the box when there was a noise behind him. He jerked upright. Marjorie stood at the door. Her face was pale. The first thing Ethan felt was not fear, but sorrow when he saw her eyes looking at the room like someone looking at an old wound that had been reopened without any preparation. "Ethan." Her voice choked. He said nothing. No excuses, no explanations. He just stood there waiting for her to speak. "You shouldn't have come in here." Her voice was not reproachful, not angry. Just tired. tired in the way one would be if one carried too many painful memories in such a small space. Ethan took a step forward but stopped when he saw her retreat slightly. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "The door was open. I thought someone had—" "Yes," she interrupted. The short answer made the space thick. "Someone has been in this room. It wasn't you." Her voice was sharp, as cold as the wind cutting into skin. Ethan felt the skin on the back of his neck tingle. "Who do you think?" Marjorie did not answer at once. She entered, her hands shaking slightly as she closed the window with the wooden bar. She looked around the room, her eyes appraising, searching for signs. "Perhaps," she said, her voice low, "you came here not to take anything, but to see what I still have." Ethan swallowed hard. For Southwind Gully, Marjorie stopped, turned to him. For the first time since he had met her, her eyes showed real fear, fear not for herself but for something else, or for someone else. "Ethan," her voice was hoarse, "there are things in the past that people think are buried, but in truth they just lie there, and there are people who never want them found." Ethan thought of the letter again, remembered Jacob's voice in every stroke of ink. "Don't trust anyone outside the ranch." Ethan took a deep breath. "Tell me everything," he said. "No matter what, I won't leave." Tears welled in Marjorie's eyes, but they didn't fall. She turned her face away a little, hiding the shaking in her thin shoulders. "I know," she whispered, "because if you were the type to leave, you would have left the first night." As the afternoon wore on, the sun set slowly. Ethan sat on the porch while Marjorie rested. The wind blew through the fence, carrying the smell of hay. Sam Ridge walked over and sat down beside him. "I saw you go into the West Wing," Sam said, without beating around the bush. Ethan said nothing, just looked straight at the land in the distance. Sam sighed, his eyes lined with the lines of someone who had seen too much sadness at the ranch. "I knew you would get there," he continued. "That room is not a place for outsiders to enter. But I think maybe you won't be an outsider anymore." Ethan turned. "Do you know what happened to Jacob Lane?" Sam looked out into the distant valley, his eyes dark. "I know part of it," he said, "but the most important part, only the earth knows." Ethan fell silent. Sam continued very slowly. "You better be prepared, Ethan. Some secrets are not meant to be found without a price." Ethan looked down at his calloused hands. "If the truth is out there, I must find it." Sam looked at him for a long time, then said hoarse and small, "You're more like Jacob than I thought." That night, when Ethan returned to his room, he felt one thing clearly: his life was entangled in a story that was much bigger. Bigger than a poor cowboy who dreamed of owning a small piece of land. He stood at the window looking out at the black silhouette of Southwind Gully in the distance. A secret. An unsent letter. An open door. An unburied past. And an old woman is holding in her heart the truth that no one dares to touch. Ethan knew from the moment he stepped into that room. He became part of the secret, and the only one who could break the silence of all these years. The next morning was foggier than usual. Red Valley was blanketed in a thin white mist, like a shawl draped over the ancient land. The fog seemed to make everything hazy, even the things Ethan was trying to keep clear in his mind. He woke before sunrise, not because of cowboy habit, but because he had barely slept the night before. The West Room, Jacob's letter, the fear in Marjorie's eyes, all of it had been like a saw cutting into his heart all night. Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The cool breeze woke him up. The smell of pine on the porch mixed with the scent of damp earth after dew, reminding him of his father and the mornings they spent leading the cows across the dry land of High Mesa. Those memories always made him feel like a part of him was intact, a part that survived no matter what life threw at him. Sam Ridge appeared from the stables, an old metal coffee pot in his hand. "You up early, Ward?" he asked, placing the jug on the step and sitting down beside him. Ethan took 2 tin cups and poured coffee for both of them. The strong, bitter smell wafted up. "I have a feeling," Ethan said slowly, "things are starting to move, Sam. And I'm in the middle of it and I don't understand it." Sam sighed, rubbing his calloused hands on the hot coffee cup. "This," he said, his voice hoarser than usual, "actually started a long time ago. Longer before you came to Lone Cedar. Longer before Jacob." He paused. Ethan looked over and saw in his eyes, not just pity but a vague guilt, the kind of guilt that only people who stand on the edge of the truth but don't have the strength to pull others up feel. "What are you not telling me, Sam?" Ethan asked. Sam pondered for a long moment. "Ethan," he said, "do you remember how I told you that only the earth knows what happened at Southwind Gully, miss? Because the earth has seen, but the earth does not speak. As for humans, sometimes they speak too much, and sometimes they say nothing at all." He looked straight at Ethan, a look as heavy and slow as a stone falling into a well. "Caleb Boone is not someone you should look down on." Ethan clenched his fist around his coffee cup. "He was involved in Jacob's death." Sam didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath as if swallowing back years of trauma. "I can't say for sure, Ethan. I wouldn't say what I hadn't seen with my own eyes. But I know Jacob figured something out about Western Meridian. And I know he wouldn't have had any reason to fall down a cliff. Jacob isn't the careless type." Ethan had sensed it the moment he read the letter. But hearing Sam speak made all his doubts take shape. "So," Sam continued, "a few days ago I saw strange footprints around the north fence. Not from a local cowboy. And last night I saw lights moving at the bottom of the hill. There was no reason for anyone to be walking down there at that time." Ethan put down his coffee cup, his body tensing with the survival instincts of a Western cowboy. "They went into the west room," he said softly, as if speaking loudly would make it more real. "I know," Sam replied, his voice no longer concealed. When Ethan brought the rest of the coffee into the house, he found Marjorie sitting at the kitchen table. She was wearing a smoky wool coat, her hair pulled back in a looser bun than usual. Though her eyes were still tired, she forced a small smile when she saw Ethan, the kind of smile of someone who knows she doesn't have to be tough in front of anyone anymore. "Good morning, Ethan," she said softly. "Are you feeling better?" he asked, pulling up a chair and sitting across from her. "Fine." A short but true answer. Ethan considered for a few seconds and then said bluntly, "Marjorie, there's something you're not telling me. And now, people are breaking into your house looking for something. You can't do this alone." Her fragile smile faded. "Ethan, there are things I keep back, not because I want to hide them, but because I'm afraid that if I say them, the person I'm telling won't be safe." He looked at her for a long moment. "But I'm a Lone Cedar man now. Whatever the reason we got married in the first place, I don't want to be left out of this anymore." There was a long silence. Only the slow ticking of Nathan Lane's wall clock could be heard. Then she nodded. For the first time, Ethan saw consent without any resistance in those eyes. "Then this afternoon," she said, "I will tell you all about it. But before that, I want you to do something for me." "What?" "Go to Southwind Gully with Sam. Take the little wooden box on the shelf in the west room, the one with the brass lock." "Remember it," Ethan nodded. "Bring it out there. I need to know." Her voice trailed off, "whether they are digging up old things or burying new ones." That sentence sent a chill down Ethan's spine. By noon, Sam had the horses ready. Ethan rode Dusty, the brown horse he'd been training for weeks, and Sam rode Paint, his familiar horse. Leaving the main part of the ranch, they followed a dirt road that wound down into the valley. Every now and then, Sam glanced around with a wary look, the kind of wariness only people who had been through real trouble had. As they approached Southwind Gully, the wind picked up. Narrow cliffs rose on either side like giant mouths of earth trying to swallow the light. Ethan dismounted first. He looked around. There was no obvious sign, but the feeling of someone having been here lingered like heat under the sand. "What are we looking for?" Ethan asked. "Not looking," said Sam, examining the ground but seeing if anyone has looked for anything. Sam pointed toward the edge of the gully. Right at the foot of the hill, there was a piece of earth that had been turned over, very new. Ethan stepped forward, knelt down, and scooped up dirt. The soil underneath was still damp. It had been dug yesterday or last night. "What do you think they are digging for?" Sam looked into the distance, his eyes heavy. "I think," he swallowed, "they're looking for something Jacob hid." Ethan turned to look at Sam. "You know what Jacob is hiding. Why haven't you told him?" Sam tilted his head, his eyes filled with memories no one wanted to remember. "I promised Nathan Lane I would protect his secret, if ever it came back. And Ethan, I fear that day has come." Ethan opened the wooden box Marjorie gave him. Inside the box, under the thin cloth, was an object that stunned him. A long metal tube like an old pioneer map container. Heavy, cold, engraved with old non-English characters. Ethan looked at Sam. "What is this?" Sam breathed heavily, placing a shaking hand on the metal pipe. "It is proof," he said, "proof that if it falls into the hands of Western Meridian, Lone Cedar will never again belong to Marjorie." Ethan tightened his grip on the tube. "We have to tell her." Sam nodded. "And be prepared, because from the moment you hold this, you are no longer just her ranch hand." Ethan looked down at the heavy object in his hand. The wind blew through the gully like the sigh of restless souls. "I understand." From this moment on, he enters the story of Lone Cedar Ranch, not as a poor cowboy taken in, but as someone chosen to protect what Jacob failed to protect. And Ethan knew one thing for sure: whoever dug this place will come back. That afternoon, the sky over Red Valley was a strange gray. Clouds gathered on the horizon like a slow-moving herd of animals. The wind picked up whipping red dust along the fences of Lone Cedar Ranch. Ethan and Sam returned, carrying the heavy metal pipe that carried an unresolved past. Marjorie stood on the porch when Ethan returned. She was wearing an earth-colored cardigan, her eyes trained on the two men as if trying to read their expressions. When Ethan dismounted, she looked at the wooden box in his hands. Her eyes changed, not with fear, but as if someone had just confirmed something they had suspected all along. "You found it." Her voice was soft, so soft the wind could carry it. Ethan placed the box in her hands. "You know what it is, right?" Marjorie set the wooden box on the porch table, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the lid. A long moment passed before she nodded. "I know, and I hoped it would never be opened again." Ethan stood beside her, his mind full of questions, but he knew she needed time to catch her breath. "Come inside," she said, taking the wooden box and stepping inside. Dinner that night was a silent affair. Ethan ate without tasting anything. Marjorie drank a few spoonfuls of soup, then put down her spoon and sat there staring into the old kitchen. As Sam cleared the dishes, Marjorie motioned for Ethan to follow her into the study, the other room, not the west room, full of memories. "Lock the door for me," she said. Ethan did as he was told. The small click of the lock made the atmosphere heavier. Marjorie set the box on the table and took a deep breath. Her hand rested on the lid, holding it still, as if trying to steady herself before opening a part of her memory she hadn't touched in years. "Ethan," she said, her voice not trembling but softening noticeably. "What I am about to tell you, no one but Jacob, and I know the whole of it. And Jacob," her voice caught. "He took his share down to Southwind Valley." Ethan stood by the table, hands on hips, eyes intent. Marjorie opened the box. Inside was an old metal tube engraved with strange symbols that Ethan did not understand. "Jacob found this when he was 18, she said. "He was curious about the rocks near Southwind Gorge. One day he saw a landslide and discovered this tube." "What's in there?" Ethan asked. Marjorie did not answer immediately. She opened the tube. Inside were sheets of old paper, brittle, as if they could shatter at the slightest touch. On them were maps of the terraces, notes on mineral veins, underground pipes, and technical symbols. Ethan looked closely. "It's a land survey map," he said. "Not only that," Marjorie replied, "the map confirms that under Southwind Gully lies the largest groundwater source in the Red Valley. It lies entirely within Lone Cedar Ranch." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" "Which means," Marjorie said slowly, "if Western Meridian gets this map, they'll prove the water comes from the edge of their land and then sue for the rights. And if they get the water—" She looked at Ethan, her eyes shimmering like a lake about to rain. "Lone Cedar will die. This land depends on that water." Ethan felt like everything was coming together: Caleb Boone's appearance, the digging in the gully, the break-in in the west room, Jacob's death. "So, Jacob died because of this?" Ethan asked, his voice as low as the wind whistling through the door. Marjorie closed her eyes. 2 tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, but she did not reach up to wipe them away. She let them fall, as if she had no strength left to fight them. "He died trying to protect the ranch, wanting to give this to me before it was too late. But he never did." Her voice cracked but remained strong, a strength that made Ethan feel a tightening in his chest. Ethan placed his hand on the table and tapped it lightly. "You've lived alone with this secret all these years." Marjorie looked at him. Her eyes said what words could not. "I did not choose to be silent. I was forced to be silent." After Jacob died, she continued, "Western Meridian stopped for a while. I thought they had given up, but it turns out they were just waiting for me to weaken." Ethan understood immediately what she meant. They waited for her to get sick, waited for her to die, waited for the ranch to have no heir. He felt the blood rush to his face. "Then why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you notify the authorities?" "Because I don't know who to trust," Marjorie replied. "Caleb Boone has a lot of influence in this area. Some people owe him favors, some are bribed. Jacob knows that, so he's tried to protect the documents himself." Ethan took a deep breath to calm down, and now he asked softly, "Now, they know my time is short." Her voice was weak but firm. "And they know I married you." Ethan looked at her, his eyes deep and bright like smoldering fire. "You mean they think I'm in the way?" "Yes." She nodded slightly. "If I die, Lone Cedar will go to my husband. And if my husband is unmanageable, Western Meridian will have to find another way to get the land." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "You're saying," he said slowly, "I might be being followed." Marjorie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes were enough for Ethan to understand. That night, Ethan lay in bed unable to close his eyes. The winter wind howled through the window. Rusty occasionally scratched his hoof on the barn floor, sensing something unsettling about the ranch. Ethan turned on the kerosene lamp, stood up, put on his coat, and walked out onto the porch. The ranch was bathed in a blue-purple darkness. The faint moonlight cast shadows across the long fences like fingers of spirits reaching up from the earth. Ethan walked to the north fence where Sam said he had seen strange footprints. He knelt down and touched the ground with his hands. "There are shoe prints. Not today, but not for too long." He stood up. He raised his head, and that's when Ethan saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the hill, about 50 yards from the ranch, not moving, not in a hurry, just standing, watching him. For a few seconds in the pale moonlight, Ethan saw a reflection from something, maybe a clock mirror, maybe binoculars. He didn't have time to react before the figure turned away, disappeared behind the trees. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists. Caleb Boone, or his people, they did not leave. They are waiting. And Ethan knows, from this moment on, he must be ready to protect Lone Cedar with his blood, if necessary. The next morning the sun rose very slowly. The pale yellow light seemed to be trapped by a thick layer of clouds unable to shine. The air in Red Valley was heavy and cold, giving one the feeling that a storm, though not a real storm, was silently brewing beneath the earth. Ethan left the room with a heavy head. He had only slept a few hours last night. The image of the dark figure standing on the edge of the hill was still fresh in his mind. The feeling of someone watching the ranch made him tense up. He looked toward the porch. Marjorie was already sitting there. She wore an ash-colored wool coat, the collar pulled up to her chin. Her hand rested on a cup of hot tea, but the steam did not warm her thin, trembling fingers. "Why are you up so early?" Ethan asked, moving closer. "Couldn't sleep," Marjorie replied, her voice as soft as an old towel. The answer made Ethan's heart clench. They both knew the reason had nothing to do with the weather. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. He studied Marjorie's face in the early morning light. She looked more tired than yesterday. Her eyes were slightly sunken, her skin pale, and her lips were colorless. But beneath the fatigue was the same determined look of someone who had survived too much loss. "You should rest more," Ethan said softly. Marjorie shook her head slightly. "There won't be many days when I can stand up this easily, Ethan." Ethan felt like someone was squeezing his chest. She turned her eyes to him. "I heard Sam say you saw someone on the North Hill." Ethan nodded. "Last night. Can you see clearly?" "No. But I know for sure it's a human and not an animal." Marjorie said nothing more. She looked up at the wide field beyond as if reading something only she could see. Then she put down her glass and said slowly, "They're closer than I thought." Ethan sensed fear and preparation in that statement. As Ethan was sweeping the yard in front of the stable, Sam Ridge approached with an unusual expression on his face, worry. His thick eyebrows furrowed, his eyes scanning the ranch as if searching for some sign. "Ward," Sam called. Ethan stopped. "What's wrong, Sam?" Sam looked around, then pulled Ethan closer. "Have you been to the east barn?" The back door was yanked open. The wooden latch almost broke. Ethan paused. "Surely not the wind," Sam shook his head. No wind in Red Valley would blow a bolt. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "They're already in the field," he said. Sam nodded. "No face but boot prints. Not on the ranch." Ethan looked toward the main house. "Marjorie can't know about this." Sam frowned. "You're going to hide it," Ethan sighed heavily. "Not to hide it. But she can't afford to worry anymore right now." Sam crossed his arms, looking at him appraisingly. "You care about her more than I thought." The corners of his eyes crinkled slightly. "And what you just said?" Those were the words of a family member, not a hired hand. Ethan didn't reply. But Sam understood. That afternoon Ethan followed Marjorie's lead and went over the land registers and papers with her over the years. The two of them sat in the small study, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, creating sad yellow streaks on the wooden table. Marjorie opened an old file and placed it in front of Ethan. She turned the pages with slightly trembling fingers. "You know," she said, "Western Meridian doesn't just want the water, Ethan. If they get the land I'm holding, they'll control the entire ranch system around Red Valley." Ethan looked at the map before him, seeing red lines drawn around Lone Cedar territory and spreading to other ranches. "That means," he said, "they will become the ones who decide on water, land prices, grazing rights, everything." "Yes," replied Marjorie, "this land will no longer belong to those who live on the land. It will belong to those who see the land as property." Ethan clenched his fists. "Jacob saw this many years ago," she continued. "It told me that one day whoever controls the water will control Red Valley." Ethan bowed his head, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Jacob is right." Marjorie looked at him for a long time, her eyes weary but strangely bright. "Ethan, you can hate me for keeping quiet all you want, but I want you to understand I didn't stay silent because I was afraid of the earth. I was afraid of losing the one person left in my life." Her voice was choked soft and deep, making Ethan unable to stand still. He put his hand on the back of her chair. "I'm not going anywhere," he said so honestly that he surprised himself with the certainty in his words. Marjorie closed her eyes for a moment. She said nothing more, but her shoulders slumped ever so slightly, as if in years this was the moment she shared some of the weight of the past. Dark down. Sam brought the oil lamp out onto the porch and lit it. The yellow light danced on the old wooden posts. Ethan was tying up the horse stall ropes when Sam came up. "There's something you need to see," Sam whispered. He handed Ethan a shell casing. Silver. New. Still smelling faintly of gunpowder. Ethan frowned. "Where did you find it?" "Near the north fence. Between last night's footprints." Ethan looked around and lowered his voice. "Caleb Boone doesn't shoot like this. He doesn't need to. He just does it." Sam nodded. "That's why it's worrying." Ethan stuffed the shell casing into his pocket. "They want to push me off the ranch." "Worse," said Sam. "They want you to make a mistake. One little trap, and they'll have something to blame you and the whole ranch." Ethan gritted his teeth. "I won't let that happen." "That said," Sam replied, "there's nothing easy about this land, Ethan. You've never touched the Western Meridian." Ethan looked at him. "Now I do." Deep night. Marjorie went to bed. Sam went to his cottage. Ethan stood alone on the porch. The Red Valley wind blew cold, carrying the scent of dry earth and road dust. Ethan put his hand on the pistol, holstered at his hip. Not to threaten anyone, just to remind himself that tonight he wasn't just protecting the ranch, he was protecting a woman whose life had worn too thin. He walked towards the north fence. The night sky was a black canvas dotted with white stars. Ethan walked slowly, listening for every small sound, the rustle of grass in the wind, the slap of Rusty's hooves against the manger, the faint vibration of wire. Then he stopped. On the distant hill, a light flashed, very fast, like a signal. Ethan crouched behind the fence post, his eyes fixed on the hilltop. He heard rolling stones, soft footsteps. Not animals, not coyotes, people. 1 second later, a voice echoed in the wind, a man's voice. The words were unclear, but Ethan caught part of them, waiting for the right time. Ethan's heart clenched. They are calculating their next move, and he understood that time was very near. Ethan returned home late at night. He stopped outside Marjorie's room, seeing a small light shining through the crack in the door. She was not asleep. He knocked lightly. "Come in." Her voice was weak but alert. Ethan pushed open the door. Marjorie was sitting propped up on a pillow reading an old notebook. Her face was golden under the desk lamp, her wrinkles catching the light like the lines etched by time. "What's wrong, Ethan?" she asked. He stood there for a few seconds, then said honestly, "You don't have to worry anymore. I will protect Lone Cedar, whatever it takes." Marjorie looked at him, and for the first time there was clear assurance in her eyes. Not because of the ranch, not because of the water, but because she was no longer alone. As Ethan left her room, he knew one thing for sure. From now on, he's not just a cowboy brought here by fate. He's a man of Lone Cedar Ranch, and he'll stand on the front lines against anyone who wants to bury the truth underground. The night wind blew across Lone Cedar Ranch, carrying a chill and an unease in the air that Ethan couldn't ignore. After leaving Marjorie's room, he went to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water, but his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from the feeling that he was protecting someone more important than his own life. Ethan stood at the sink, looking out the window. The night sky covered the ranch in a blue darkness, the thick western darkness, where there are no streetlights, no nearby houses, just earth and sky, staring at each other forever. In the silence, Ethan could hear his heart beating slowly, steadily, like before a fight he knew he couldn't compromise on. Sam Ridge walked into the kitchen as Ethan was bending down to check the lock on the back door. Sam looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You won't be able to sleep, Ward," he said in the deep, calm voice of a man who had lived through too many dry seasons and long, anxious nights on a large farm. "I don't intend to sleep," Ethan replied, standing up straight. Sam approached his hand on the old wooden door, his gaze tilted slightly toward the dark backyard. "Western Meridian doesn't give up when they see a ranch guarded. They'll try a few routes first. Test you, test the ranch. See who's nervous, who's backing down." Ethan knew Sam was right. "They will come back." Sam nodded, his eyes dimming in thought. "The shadows last night weren't a threat. They were measuring your reaction, seeing if you're the type of man who flinches or stands tall." Ethan frowned, his eyes hard. "What do you think?" Sam looked at him long and slow and said, I haven't seen anyone stand up as straight as you since Nathan Lane." That statement made Ethan choke for a few seconds. While Sam checked the doors, Ethan went out onto the porch to get some air. He looked at the old wooden posts, at the wind-stained steel wires, at the distant fields, where darkness lay like a thick blanket. Lone Cedar Ranch wasn't his, never had been his. But now, all the danger heading this way made him feel as responsible as if he had been born here. The wind carried the scents of horses, grass, and dry earth, familiar things that calmed Ethan. He thought back to his life's journey, the years of wandering, the nights sleeping in trucks, the mornings waking up in haystacks on other people's farms, the feeling of drifting, not knowing where he would end up tomorrow. And then he came here. Lone Cedar Ranch didn't just open its doors to him. It gave him purpose. There are places you don't choose, but the land chooses you. Ethan feels that more clearly than ever. When Ethan returned to the house, he found Marjorie standing in the living room doorway, her hands on the wooden railing for balance. She was still wearing the ash-colored sweater from earlier, but her face was paler. Ethan ran over. "You should lie down," he said, his voice genuinely worried. "It's okay," Marjorie replied, forcing a smile. "I heard Sam say, you saw someone else last night." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, and I have a feeling they're going to take another step forward today." Marjorie showed no fear. She looked out silently into the yard, her eyes searching for every dark corner where a shadow might be hiding. "Ethan," she said, "if anything happens to me, you must know." Ethan cut her off immediately, not even letting her finish. The finality in his voice startled Marjorie a little. "I won't hear any more of that from you," Ethan said. "I've never abandoned anyone. And I'm not starting with you." Marjorie was silent for a moment, as if swallowing the words she was about to say. Then she reached out and placed her hand on Ethan's arm, a light touch, but one filled with trust. "You have a very strong heart, Ethan Ward." He turned away, his eyes burning. "You rest. I'll take care of the rest." Marjorie nodded and slowly walked back into the room, leaving the door ajar. Ethan stood there for a few seconds, watching her figure disappear behind the yellow light. Night fell sooner than expected. Sam and Ethan shared the watch, Sam at the stable, Ethan at the north fence. It was so dark he could barely see the ground. Ethan walked slowly, listening for everything, the wind rustling, the hay, the creak of the barn door, Rusty stirring. Then he stopped, a very strange sound, not animal noises, not a door, but it was the sound of metal clanging together. Ethan gently drew his gun. He took a step toward the fence. Deep darkness obscured his vision, but he could hear the faint sound of breathing. Someone was crouching behind a large rock a few feet away. Ethan bent down, his eyes scanning the ground. "Shoe prints. Fresh." He said in a low, calm but cold voice, "I know you're there. Get up." No answer. There was only the sound of the wind. Ethan took a step forward. "There's no reason for you to be digging up other people's property at night, unless you're hiding your crime." A figure sprang up very quickly. Ethan raised his gun. "Don't go any further." The figure stopped. His arms were raised to shoulder height. Ethan was too far away to see his face, but he saw a tall, thin figure, a long coat, and the high boots that miners wore. His voice rang out, hoarse and mixed with sarcasm. "The rich old lady's new cowboy, huh?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "Are you Caleb Boone's man?" He laughed, a dry laugh like stones bouncing off rocks. "I don't need to answer." "You're not a policeman." Ethan steadied his gun. "So what are you doing on Lone Cedar property?" The figure tilted its head like an animal sniffing around. "Let's see. Who's protecting it?" Having said that, he took a step back. Ethan tensed. "Hold still." But as soon as the words left his mouth, the figure turned and ran toward the trees. Ethan chased after it, but by the time he reached the pines, the figure had disappeared into the darkness so fast that only the sound of dry branches breaking in the wind remained. Ethan stopped breathing heavily, his heart pounding. "I know one thing for sure, it's not a single person watching the ranch. It's a plan. Western Meridian isn't just probing, they've begun attacking." When Ethan returned to the yard, Sam was running from the stables, his face full of worry. "Are you hurt?" Sam asked. "No." Ethan breathed heavily, "But they've officially entered the playground." Sam looked out into the darkness where Ethan had run. "And next time, maybe they won't just come to scare you." Ethan nodded. "I know. They'll target the ranch's weakest point." "Is it a vein?" Sam asked. Ethan shook his head. "No. It's Marjorie." In that moment both men fell silent. It was a truth neither wanted to admit, but they both understood. Marjorie Lane Strong, all her life, was now the most vulnerable target. Ethan felt anger simmer like lava under his skin, but then in that anger, there was something else. An oath. No sound but resonated in my heart like a rock hitting the ground. No matter what Western Meridian wants, no matter what Caleb Boone has planned, Ethan Ward will not let anyone touch Lone Cedar Ranch or Marjorie Lane while he breathes. The next morning's wind carried a chill from the western mountains, seeping through the woodwork of the main house as if foretelling an ominous day. Ethan stepped out onto the porch before the sky had even turned. The dim morning light cast a pale silver over the dry earth, making Lone Cedar Ranch feel as if it were shrouded in a fragile veil that could tear at the slightest touch. Ethan stood still, his hands clenched at his sides. The feeling of last night was still there, the pursuit, the stranger's breath in the darkness, the running footsteps echoing in the dirt like an unnamed danger. He turned his head, looking toward the north fence, where the figure had disappeared. Then he looked toward Marjorie's room. That night, she had no idea what was happening in the yard. Or did she know but pretend not to? Ethan sighed. She had always been a woman who kept it all to herself, even if her heart was more tired than her frail body. Sam Ridge emerged from the kitchen carrying the same metal coffee pot as always. But today, he wasn't drinking. He looked at Ethan, his eyes lined with the lines of someone who has worried more than slept. "Last night, "Did you see him clearly?" Sam asked, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Not a face, but I heard a voice," Ethan replied frankly. "A young man, not Caleb Boone." Sam nodded slowly. "Caleb doesn't do the dirty work himself. He always lets others do it." Ethan looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. "Did you work for Western Meridian, Sam?" Sam froze as if hit where he didn't want to be. He turned away, looking out at the field. "I never worked for them," said Sam. "But I was offered one. Years ago." Ethan waited for him to continue. Sam took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, his voice low. "After Jacob died, Western Meridian came to me. They said, if I cooperated, they wouldn't touch Marjorie anymore. They said she was getting weaker, Lone Cedar would soon need to change its name, and they wanted the next name to be someone easy to control." Ethan clenched his fists. "You refuse?" "Of course," Sam replied immediately. "I promised Nathan Lane before he died that I would protect Lone Cedar. No matter what anyone offers, I will not abandon this ranch." Ethan could feel the sincerity in every word, but he wasn't finished. Ethan could feel it. "Sam," Ethan said slowly, "what are you hiding?" Sam looked up, his eyes filled with a strange sadness. "I think Jacob talked to me the last night he was alive." Ethan held his breath. "Jacob believed he was being followed," Sam said. "And that night, he came to the stables and told me he had found something that could save Lone Cedar. But he was afraid that if he told anyone right away, the whole ranch would be in danger." Ethan asked nervously, "Do you know that is a metal pipe?" Sam shook his head. "I don't know. He just said he found evidence. Then he left, saying he'd come back and tell Marjorie everything." Ethan closed his eyes. His head felt like something was hitting it. Jacob did not return in time. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at Sam. "So what do you think about his death?" Sam replied without hesitation. "I never believed in accidents." His words sent a chill down Ethan's spine, as if someone had just opened a door Ethan had long stood in front of, but dared not touch. When Ethan entered the main house, he found Marjorie sitting at the dining table, her hands resting on a cup of tea, steam rising from it, partially obscuring her face. She looked up when she saw him. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked. "Not much," Ethan replied truthfully. Marjorie looked at him, her eyes not blaming, not asking further questions, only the deep understanding of someone who had seen the darkness longer than anyone else. "Is something bothering you?" she asked softly. Ethan sat down. The lamp on the table cast a warm glow on her skin, highlighting the lines that marked years of struggle with loss. "Sam said he saw Jacob last night," Ethan said. Marjorie paused. Even the teacup in her hand tilted slightly. "He told you everything. He said Jacob had discovered something big enough to save Lone Cedar. But then—" Ethan paused. "He didn't make it back." Marjorie bowed her head, her hand shaking, the teacup shaking slightly. "I know," she said, her voice as thin as a thread. "I know that night. Jacob came looking for me. I felt it. Every time I remember. I think, if I had stayed awake another half hour, if I hadn't missed that moment." Ethan put his hand on hers. "Don't blame yourself. What happened wasn't your fault." Tears welled in Marjorie's eyes, but she fought to keep them from falling. "You don't understand, Ethan. I'm his mother." Her voice caught. "Every mother thinks she's supposed to protect her child." Ethan felt something tug in his chest. A genuine pain from a woman once as strong as Earth, but now fragile because of the one thing Earth couldn't save, the heart of a mother who lost her child. "Since Jacob died," she continued, her voice as soft as the wind, "I have lived with a question that no one has been able to answer. Did he die because he tripped, or because someone wanted him dead?" "Who do you suspect?" Ethan asked softly, as if afraid the answer would hurt her more. Marjorie looked at him with eyes hardened by loss, but still with a light of truth that wanted to be spoken. "I think Western Meridian wants more than just land." She swallowed, then continued, "I think they want silence. And Jacob broke that silence." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "You think they killed him?" Marjorie didn't answer, but her eyes, that silence, said it all. It got dark quicker than usual. Sam went to check the stables, while Ethan stood on the porch, looking out at the hills. The night wind blew hard, sending the hay swirling across the ground like little ghosts. Ethan unbuttoned his jacket and placed his hand on the gun at his side. He didn't like guns, he didn't like violence. He was a man of the land of horses, of mornings picking hay, and quiet afternoons, listening to the wind. But when a land he loved began to be threatened, he knew sometimes the land needed someone to protect it at all costs. "If not you, then who tonight?" Sam said as he stepped onto the porch. "Maybe it won't be surveillance anymore. They'll try something bigger." Ethan looked at him understanding. "Do you think they will enter the ranch?" "Maybe," Sam replied. "Or they'll do something to get you off the ranch." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "They know I'm the only one who can stand by Marjorie," Sam said. "If they drag you out, she will have no one to protect her." Ethan finished the sentence. No one said anything more. They both understood. Marjorie called Ethan into the room before it was dark. She sat by the window, the moonlight shining on her silver hair, making her look a part of the land, hard and lonely. "Ethan," she said, "if anything bad happens, keep the tube with you. Don't let them get to you." "No one can touch you while I'm standing here," Ethan said firmly. Marjorie looked at him for a long time. "You don't have to sacrifice yourself for me." Ethan shook his head. "I do not sacrifice." His voice was deep and firm like steel forged in fire. "I choose to stand by you." A deep silence filled the air, the silence of two souls once lost now finding refuge in each other. In that moment, Ethan understood that going from loner cowboy to protector of a vast land and a fading old soul, it wasn't a burden, it was a calling. And he will go to the end, no matter the cost. The sky darkened, thick black clouds gathered in the west, bringing with them a damp chill that made the air thick as if foreshadowing a rare storm in this arid land. Lone Cedar Ranch fell into an unnatural silence. The horses in the stables no longer neighed softly as usual, but instead stamped their hooves anxiously, each sighing deeply, as if sensing something bad was approaching. Ethan stood on the porch, one hand on a wooden post, his eyes staring out at the dim road under the hazy moonlight. The night sky peeked through the thick clouds, gently shaking the land, as if to say that the coming darkness was not just from the sky. He heard the back door close and knew immediately it was Sam Ridge. "The wind's changed," Sam said, stepping closer, his voice low as if talking to himself. "It's not going to be a peaceful night, Ethan." Ethan moved his head, still looking into the distance. "Do you think they're coming, or watching for an opportunity?" Sam put his hands on his hips. "Those guys who dared to follow you at night will go one step further today. They tested our reaction. Now they want to know the limit." Ethan let out a soft breath, his breath blurring in the wind. "Then let them know, Lone Cedar is not the kind of land to be robbed." Sam looked at him, his eyes filled with worry and something akin to pride. Ethan had gone from outsider to ranch leader faster than anyone expected. Ethan turned and saw Marjorie standing in the doorway. She leaned against the wooden frame, her hands clasping her thin shawl, her face pale but her eyes still burning like a small but unquenchable flame. "Ethan, Sam," she called softly, "come inside. This cold wind is not good for anyone." Ethan stepped closer to her. "You should get some more rest, Marjorie. You didn't get much sleep last night." She smiled softly, a smile that held back the weariness and anxiety inside. "I'm used to it, Ethan. You don't need to worry about me so much." Ethan felt an invisible cut in his chest every time she said something like that. She was so used to pain and loneliness that she thought she was no longer worth worrying about, and that was what made him choke. He supported her elbow as gently as lifting a piece of crystal. "Not because I want to, but because you deserve peace," Ethan said softly. Marjorie looked at him, her eyes softening a little, just a little, but enough for Ethan to know he had touched the place in her heart that had long been locked away. As the three of them entered the living room, Sam lit the fireplace. The flames blazed, casting a warm orange glow on the walls, and Marjorie's silver hair making her look both fragile and determined. Ethan stood at the table, flipping through the map of Lone Cedar he and Sam had laid out that afternoon. The old hand-drawn lines marked the boundaries Nathan Lane had fought to protect all his life. Now they were in Ethan's hands not because of blood but because of a promise of the heart. Sam pointed to the southern corner of the map. If they come in, they'll probably take this route. The trees block our view. They're smart. Smart to the point of cowardice, Ethan said, his voice dropping. Marjorie watched the two men discuss security as if preparing for a real battle, and she felt her heart sink. All of this, all of it, was for her. "Both of you listen to me for a moment," she said. Ethan and Sam immediately turned around. "You don't owe me anything. I know these past few days. Lone Cedar has put more on you than one person should." Sam smiled a small but sincere smile. "Mrs. Lane, we are not here because of debt. We are here because of respect." Ethan looked her straight in the eye, his voice low and firm as the earth. "And I'm here because I want to prove that there are things in life that cannot be taken by force or intimidation." Marjorie sat down gently in the armchair near the fireplace, her hands clasped together. "Ethan, you know what I thought when you first walked into this ranch?" Ethan shook his head. "I think—" She paused, breathing softly. Those were the eyes of someone who had lost too much, too soon. The same eyes Nathan had when he lost his father. The same eyes Jacob had when he stood looking at the hill where their old home used to be. Ethan leaned down, his heart constricting at her words, soft as a breath but heavy as a memory. "You know, Ethan," she continued, "the silence in your eyes is not cold. It is something only those who have suffered deep loss possess. That silence is the sign of a soul that knows how to stand up even when its legs are shaking." Ethan felt his throat dry, not from pain but from emotion. He wanted to reply but couldn't find the right or deep enough words. Sam looked at them both, then stood. "I'll check the stables again. The night is unreliable." He left the room, leaving Ethan and Marjorie in the warm silence of the fireplace. Marjorie looked to the window where the wind was stirring the curtains. "It's going to rain tonight." Her voice was low but firm. "It's been a long time since it rained in Lone Cedar." Ethan moved closer to her. "Sometimes rain brings things we don't expect, Marjorie. Sometimes it's cleansing. Sometimes it's a sign of things to come." "Do you believe in omens?" she asked. "I believe in the intuition of someone who has lived with the land," Ethan replied. "The land tells me many things, it's just that sometimes I don't want to listen." Marjorie looked at him for a long time, as if reading every layer of emotion and unspoken pain. "Ethan, are you scared?" she asked softly. For a moment Ethan wanted to lie, to say he wasn't afraid. But he didn't want to hide anything from her anymore. "Scared," he said honestly. "But I'm not scared about me. I'm scared. If I don't protect Lone Cedar, then you'll lose something you don't deserve to lose." She closed her eyes, her eyelashes trembling slightly. "Loss is inevitable," she said. "But I don't want you to be the next one to suffer it because of me." Ethan knelt down in front of the chair and placed his hand on hers. "I lost what I needed to lose," he said. "The rest, I choose to protect." Marjorie opened her eyes and looked at him with a look that Westerners rarely gave anyone, a look of surrender. He said no more. She said no more. But the silence was so warm it lit the room brighter than the fire in the stove. The sound of horse hooves suddenly rang out. Both Ethan and Marjorie turned their heads at the same time. Sam ran into the room, his face as tense as a bowstring. "Ethan," he called. "There they are. Not one of them." Ethan stood up. "How much I counted, at least 3 horses. And they made no secret of their intentions." Marjorie turned pale, but she kept her voice steady. "They want to force us out." Ethan tightened his grip on the gun. "Then tonight," he said slowly, "they will know that Lone Cedar is no longer a lonely ranch." Sam nodded vigorously. "I'm with you. No matter what." Marjorie stood up, her hand on her chest, as if trying to steady her pounding heart. "Ethan," she called, her voice trembling but her eyes determined. "Be careful. You have much to live to see." He looked at her, his heart beating faster than ever. "So do you," he said, "and I will do everything I can to make sure of it." Outside, the hooves pounded harder like dry thunder on the ground. The wind whipped against the windows. The storm was beginning to gather pace. But inside Ethan another storm was even stronger, a storm of choice and courage. He opened the door, stepped out onto the porch, and for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone anymore. The drumbeat of hooves outside the gate signaled a confrontation Lone Cedar could not avoid. The wind blew hard, whipping up thin swirls of red dust that clung to the steps and Ethan's shoes. Lightning flashed in the gray sky, a bright blade cutting through the darkness, then disappeared in the heavy silence. Ethan stepped down the steps, his broad hand on the butt of his gun, but not yet drawn. He didn't want violence, but he knew this was no night for gentleness or reason. Behind him, Sam Ridge carried an oil lamp, the yellow light casting a familiar yet somber glow on his rough face. "They're waiting," Sam whispered, his eyes on the low hill where the horses were stopped. Ethan kept his eyes on the darkness beyond. "Come in, Sam." Sam shook his head. "You think I'd let you go out there alone?" Ethan turned to look at him. "Not for me. For Marjorie." Sam exhaled, understanding immediately what Ethan left unsaid. If anything happened to Ethan, Sam would be the one standing by her side. Sam nodded. "I'll be at the door. But you, don't do anything stupid." "No," Ethan said. "But I will do what is necessary." Ethan walked, his shadow blending into the flickering light of the approaching storm. Each step seemed to trample on sad memories, the miserable life he had lived through. But unlike before, this time he knew he was walking towards something he had chosen, not something life had forced upon him. As Ethan approached the south fence, 3 figures on horseback waited. They wore dark leather jackets, their hoods pulled low over their faces. Their horses stood so still they almost blended into the darkness. The man in the middle, tall, slightly thin, stepped his horse up a bit. His voice rang out hoarsely. "Ward right." Ethan kept his distance. "What do you want?" The other guy laughed like a sick animal. "Nothing much. It's just, my master wanted to talk. But that old lady Lane wouldn't meet, so we were sent to deliver the message." Ethan looked him up and down. "Get the message across by sneaking into the ranch at night, or using silver bullets to threaten." The man laughed louder, a shrill, fearless laugh. "So she told me everything. Good job." Ethan squeezed his hand but kept his voice calm. "Marjorie Lane doesn't owe you anything. And Lone Cedar isn't a place anyone can take." "Oh, but this land won't be hers much longer," he said, his voice turning cold. "She's an old woman, Ward, a sickly woman with not much left. How can a woman like that keep a ranch long?" Ethan took a step closer, his eyes as hard as steel. "Say that again." His voice dropped, "and I guarantee you won't be able to say it a third time." The other man sat up straighter, his lips curling up. "Oh, angry now. Good. I just need you to make a small mistake." Ethan understood. They wanted him to make the first move, to have an excuse, to bend the law to their will. He remembered that, took a deep breath. "What does Caleb Boone want?" Ethan asked, even though he already knew the answer. The man shrugged. "Simple. Southwind Gully. Give us a map of the water source and everything will be fine." Ethan looked at him with eyes that no longer hid anything. "Did you kill Jacob Lane?" The 3 were silent. It was too long, too dangerous. Then the leader chuckled, a laugh that answered nothing but said it all. Ethan felt a surge of heat rush through him, but he held back, not falling into the trap. The other guy leaned forward. "Listen, Ward. Mrs. Lane is dying. The ranch will go to her lawful husband, you. But you can't keep it, strong but alone. You have no money, no lawyer, no power. In this part of the world, that's what matters." Ethan looked straight into his eyes that were hidden in the darkness. "I have something you don't have." "What?" he asked mockingly. "Honor." The other spat on the ground. "Honor doesn't hold a ranch cowboy." Ethan didn't back down. But it kept the soul. The storm flashed again, illuminating the man's face, full of anger and a little confusion. He hadn't expected Ethan to be unmoved. "All right," another said. "We don't have time. Ward, just hand over that metal tube. The old woman has had it too long." Ethan tilted his head slightly. He knew about the tube. He was sure of it. "That means someone on the ranch is being watched more closely than they think." The leader shrugged and lifted his chin. "Give it here, and we'll leave the ranch tonight. No one will get hurt." Ethan looked them over, dizzy with anger. "But the heart is strangely calm." He spoke slowly, clearly. "No, that pipe belongs to Lone Cedar, and I'll die before I give it to you." The other guy exhaled. "Then don't blame me." He raised his hand to signal. The remaining 2 men urged their horses forward as if preparing to surround Ethan. At that moment, Ethan put his hand on the butt of his gun but didn't draw it. A gunshot echoed from the east fence. The crowd was startled. The horse neighed and reared. Sam Ridge appeared behind Ethan holding an old shotgun. "You are in the wrong place tonight," his voice boomed like a hurricane. "This land is no place for joking." The leader glared. "You're old and still want to be a hero." Sam stepped out and stood next to Ethan. "I am old, but I know right from wrong better than a baby." Ethan kept his eyes on them. "Go. You still have a chance." The leader looked at the two men before him, a young cowboy fueled by pain and old Mahout with unwavering loyalty. He knew they would not back down. A strong wind blew across, followed by a very close clap of thunder. Finally he pulled the reins. "Okay," he growled. "That's it for tonight. But you picked the wrong guy to fight." He turned his horse, the other two followed. Before disappearing into the darkness, he turned back and said one last sentence. "No one can save Mrs. Lane, not even you, Ward." 3 horses galloped away, leaving behind the sound of thunder and wind. Ethan stood still, his eyes dark, as if the ground was about to break apart. Sam put a hand on his shoulder. "You did well. Not rash, not giving them an excuse." Ethan still looked away, his voice low and husky in the wind. "But they will come back. Next time, not to talk." Sam nodded slowly. "Come back. Marjorie is waiting to hear." When Ethan opened the door and walked in, Marjorie was sitting on the living room sofa, her hands clasped together until they were white. She looked up at him, her eyes wet but still bright. "Ethan," she called. He approached and knelt before her like a son. "No one gets into the ranch tonight," he said. "I promise you." Marjorie reached up and touched his cheek lightly. "You have become a light I never thought I would see again." Ethan held her hand firmly. "We will protect Lone Cedar. Together." Outside, the storm began to fall. Rain poured down on the roofs, on the parched earth, on the currents of fear that had been lingering in the air for months. But inside the little house, something else was brewing: hope. Though fragile, though paid with blood, it still shines. Ethan and Marjorie's story reminds us that sometimes the most precious things in life are not the things we own, but the people we courageously choose to walk with, even in our final years, even in the middle of a desert. Loss can be devastating, but love, even late, can be powerfully healing. The elderly don't need pity, but rather to be seen, respected, and loved with sincerity. And the young sometimes find meaning in protecting a soul that seems to have faded. The earth may dry up, and people may weaken, but courage and humanity will never be lost if kindness remains. It is a lesson that everyone, especially those who have suffered greatly, can find echoes in. Thank you for accompanying the story. If you find these values worthwhile, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can send you more meaningful stories.